so Laura, I'm just gonna get it started. Thank you everyone for being here. My name's Karina. I'm one of the success coaches here at MCC. We have Bianca as well. She'll be moderating the chat just in case there's any questions. And then we also have Laura here who will be the presenter, and we have Roger on the back end also with the slides. I don't know if he will necessarily be presenting, but both of you work together on it. Yes. So thank you all, and we'll go ahead and get started. Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. We are so excited that all of you are here, Zoomers and in person. This is very exciting. Don't forget to fill out your attendance because you will be entered into a raffle. Yes, which is very exciting. So make sure that you do that. Roger, you want to get us started?
Yeah, sorry, I was just waiting for you. Yes, so I am Roger Morales. Laura Power is the person in front of you if you are there. I'm the reference and instruction librarian. This is about I think starting the second year that we've been doing this, or it's been quite a while. I'll drop later on towards the end of the session. I can drop in the other ones that we've done previously if anyone is interested. It's not on banned books. This is the first time that we do one, at least with myself on this topic. So I can share that later. But thank you for having us in general. I'm going to get started here. Before we dive in, I just wanted to give a quick announcement. We are just started our book club for students, and we're having our second meeting on October 5th at 2:30, right after that 2:20 classroom time. So if anyone is interested, feel free to drop by. It's good for students, faculty, or whoever might be interested. The way it's been working is that we've been sharing about 10 minutes or so of a book you're reading or one that you'd like to recommend to the group. So again, if you're interested in that would be next Tuesday at 2:30. You can email me if you have any questions or anything like that. Okay, let's get started here. I did a quick Jamboard to get these questions started, but what we'd like to do is kind of have a conversation. We have a bunch of slides ready, but I like to follow wherever the curiosity of the group might take us. So, and just kind of starting the conversation about banned books and censorship and things like that. I thought that these three questions might be good just to kind of get us started and maybe thinking about the topic in general. So what I'll do is I'm going to just pull up this Jamboard here. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of an interactive board. But we're just answering these questions of how would you explain censorship to someone that is unfamiliar with it? Do you think the internet should be censored is number 2, or number 3, does censorship result in reduced chances of education for society? So if anyone wants to comment or have any questions or anything concerns about these questions, I'm going to just pull this up and hopefully, there you go.
And if you guys have ideas about that, you can just say them and Roger is just going to type them so that everybody can see them together.
Yeah.
And for those in the room, sorry, Zoomers. That sounds like I'm calling you, I don't know, Zoomers. Well, I am literally. But in the room, I'm going to pass out some guides that you can look through. These are field guides on banned books. This is the top 10 most challenged in banned books. I have a few of these. And then this one weighs 20 pounds, and it is a list of all of the titles updated in, I think, 2014. No, sorry.
So yeah, if you're in person, as you look through that list, maybe there's some patterns that you can see there, or just generally speaking, does anyone have any sort of answers or comments for these questions? If you're in person or in Zoom, you could just you can unmute yourself, or you could just speak out loud.
All right, so we have a participant in the room who says she does not think the internet should be censored. Ooh, and then Jacqueline says again.
Here. I added the exclamation point because I figured that might be it.
I think so, yes, multiple people.
All right, multiple people, so I'll put ×2. What about how would someone go about explaining censorship if it's someone's unfamiliar to that? Does anyone have any comments on that?
How would you guys explain it?
or maybe describe it or something?
Yeah. Yes, say the first part of that. Controlling the source so that people can access it or not access it. Absolutely. Control is a really important word. I'm glad that you brought that up.
All right, I'm gonna put controlling the source. That's what we said at first, right?
That's nice.
All right. I think that's pretty accurate. Oh, there's one more in the chat. Let's see. Oh, got it. Got one more here. Let me just copy and paste this.
What about the third question? If information is censored, is that reducing education, Brendan? Yes, short and sweet. Yes, we think that the answer to 3 is yes.
All right, that sounds great. Yes. And I would try my best on the typing. Sometimes I'm not the best. Let's see if there's any more in the chat. All right.
It becomes particularly tricky when you have people who are looking to get education, but perhaps do not have as much power as others within a community. So young people, they don't necessarily have the means to access a lot of other information except what is given to them. So if you start limiting what is allowed to be passed to young people, that becomes really problematic.
All right, so we've got some answers here. And we've got some more. Kim is writing in. Here's another answer for this one.
Ooh, whoever typed this one or chatted this one, imposing somebody's beliefs onto others, that's goes with that idea of control, but that's definitely a theme as we start to talk about who wants to challenge what books are in public libraries, what books are allowed to be read. It becomes something that, well, if I don't want it, no one should have it. And that's really problematic.
Right, it's creating kind of a singular voice, if you will, where, most times multitude of different opinions that can, even in research, right, it pushes it forward when you kind of question it or when you poke at it to see if this, does this theory hold up, is it not, things like that. Is there any other comment that we want to put on here? We could.
Yeah, we got one more in the room.
Okay.
A lot. An example of censorship and education, like glossing over what America has done for people of color. And there's history books that claim that Native Americans openly gave their space to settlers. No, what?
Yes, and that is definitely this idea of censorship through being the owner of the communication and how it is written. So not necessarily controlling other people's information, but writing the information from only your perspective, that myopic kind of lens of, white American or male or colonizer or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. How do we type that out? I don't know.
Does this kind of?
That's perfect. You got it.
All right, that's a very good, answer. All of these are things that we're gonna touch on.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm gonna get out of the Jamboard and I'm gonna go back to the slides. Let's see if it pulls up. Okay. All right, thank you for that. So censorship, this is the way that it is described by ALA. And ALA is the American Library Association, which was founded in 1876. So we almost 150 years old.
145 years old.
Yes, it's super impressive if you think about it. So basically, this is an association of professional librarians in general that were brought together to establish standards and things like that. Thanks, Bree, for that, for your comment there in the chat. So it was created to provide leadership for the development, promotion, and improvement of library and information services and the profession of librarianship in order to enhance learning and ensure access to information for all. That last piece right there, this is the one that we're kind of interested, that we're really interested in, is to enhance learning and ensure access to information for all. A big reason why ALA was created was basically for the intention to provide privacy for patrons. Patrons are anyone that have a library card, community members, anything like that. As you can imagine, pre-internet, the library was where the main place where you would go to get any sort of vetted information, or mostly any information in general, apart from newspapers and things like that. So this association kind of pushed it forward so that you as a patron or as a reader have the access to all the things that you might want to have access to, whether it's deemed, suspicious, or any sort of adjective that you want to add there to a source that you may be trying to access. So let's take a look at what we mean by ban, which is, here we have a verb, and it is to prohibit, especially by legal means or social pressure. Is there something you want to add there, Laura?
No, well, yes, because I'm about to say it. I was going to say no, but, so yes, the answer is yes. The picture of Harry Potter is there because every single year, the entire series of Harry Potter books is challenged somewhere in the United States. It always makes the top 10 list, and the reasons for that we'll go into just a little bit later. But that's something that people actively try to remove from libraries, particularly from school libraries.
Correct. And depending, I've worked in public libraries where we had the conversation because the patrons brought it up in terms of like there were, right when it came out, I would say there was more sort of intensity around it. For the case that I was sort of like, my experience was, the case for it was that the parents or patrons were concerned that Harry Potter was condoning or approving of witchcraft, and their portrayal or definition of witchcraft, I would say, is slightly different than is portrayed in Harry Potter, or I would say is more in line with sort of exaggerated notions of it, I would say. That was sort of the claim to it, but it's been challenged, like Laura said, forever since it came out. So I'm going to click on the other slide, check on the chat here really quick. Yes, Jacqueline, it's due to religious beliefs. That was the main challenge, if you will. Okay, hit next here. So according to the ALA, censorship is a suppression of ideas and information that certain persons, individuals, groups, or government officials find objectionable or dangerous. So in this case, in the Harry Potter case, they would find it either offensive or objectionable in terms of that sort of religious belief or freedom. So if we move down here to just a third little sentence there, it says censors, who are the person who are the actively trying to censor, try to use the power of the state to impose their view of what is truthful and appropriate or offensive and objectionable on everyone else. So whoever had that comment that we put on the Jamboard, that was spot on. And then the last one is the last sentence there. The censor wants to prejudge materials for everyone. So in that sort of case where, like, public libraries and things like that, it would be sort of in the classification, right? So one example that I had when I was working in Colorado was there was a patron who wanted to, was positing that having the Bible or any sort of religious text, foundational one, I would say, either like, Jewish texts, the Protestant Bible, the Catholic Bible, all of those should not be in nonfiction, because he was arguing that he thought it was all fiction, and he's an atheist. And so on his religious beliefs, he wanted to sort of impose that this should all be, put in fiction and not in nonfiction, because it's sending the wrong message. So that's kind of one way of doing that. Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, and something to also pay attention to is that idea of judgment, of prejudgment, is almost always taken out of context. The material in the book that is being challenged is almost always being taken out of context. So a book that I like to give as an example all the time, and my students have heard this before, is Matilda by Roald Dahl. And if you've seen that movie, if you've read that book, there is a young girl whose parents are actively neglectful, and there is a principal at her school who is actively abusive toward children, and she fights back. She and all of the children get together. It is really a lovely message of togetherness and community and standing up for yourself. People, however, want to ban and remove that book from libraries because they say that a child should not talk back to adults.
Right.
Well, that's the whole point of the book. Out of context, she is talking back to adults, but within the context of the book, she is fighting an abuser. She is doing exactly what we want children to do, which is try to reach out and get support and fight for themselves. So taking something out of that context is really problematic, particularly if you're trying to prejudge that.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, the story of Harry Potter is very similar. There's so many other themes in there that it's as a reader, I like my claim would be that, you know, the witchcraft, quote unquote, is sort of incidental and kind of more contextual than the main argument or thing that is trying to be conveyed. All right, is there anything else you want to say on this slide before I go over? Okay, cool. So what we're talking about here kind of historically is the First Amendment, right? Which is, you know, Congress shall not make a law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or the abridging of the freedom of speech or the press. So basically this is the precedent set for the freedom of speech, which is what we all enjoy and what censorship in lots of ways goes in opposition of this. The freedom to express yourself, whether artistically, in the written word, or both, or what have you. This is an American right, a censorship challenge, really. So in that sense, there's a lot of text here, which I'll just kind of highlight. But the ALA Bill of Rights, right, the American Library Association, back when it was formed, we've had several reiterations of this Bill of Rights. But generally speaking, what this Bill of Rights is intended for is the right for you to go to a library, get any information that you may want, and not have any repercussions for it. So what that means in a public library, for example, there's lots of systems in which, so when you go to the library, whatever you check out doesn't stay in your profile, is one way of, you know, librarians trying to protect you from whoever might want to get your record. So for example, let's say that the police thought that someone was a suspect in a case and they wanted to access their library records to see if that was any correlation between what they were reading or accessing to the crime committed. They will put a warrant on that, you know, on that account. And then we would, as librarians, have to turn that over. And so as a workaround, you know, librarians are kind of activists in that way. We set up systems in which we can limit how much we actually keep. So if you go to a public library, most public libraries have this now, it's pretty standard. If you use their, you know, their computer lab or anything like that, nothing stays within their system past an hour. So if anything wanted to get accessed by the cops or anyone, you know, the FBI or what have you, it would have to be typically within that 1 hour period or within the week that within the transaction of checking out. So there's like lots of steps taken forward so that everyone can just go get whatever they need without any sort of overarching implication. And the Bill of Rights is something that we as a librarian pushed for, I'm pretty sure all the way to the Senate, so that we can have, so that everyone can have this. And back in the day, I want to say like in the 30s and 40s, leading up to World War II, this was a big deal because this was part of the American dream. It was how you, quote unquote, picked yourself up by the bootstrap and, you know, like found your way around. Because you had access to materials, right? You had a library card. We had lots of newspapers at that time, so it was a big deal to not have any sort of repercussion and consequence to whatever it is that you may be reading, as radical as it may be. And if you think about it in that time in the 50s, right? That was, I mean, collectively the public rhetoric was, you know, fascism, communism, these types of things, especially around World War II. So it was super important. Because if you want to get educated on those things, as just someone that's curious, you should be able to do so. You should be able to educate yourself to vote responsibly.
You should be able to go to the library, check out the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, read it, process it, identify what you think about it, and nobody gets to use that information against you. And as Roger said, in the 50s, the McCarthy era, where Joseph McCarthy was trying to was successfully persecuting people for being communists, that was really, really important. You can go to the library, and it is such, it feels far away now, but anything from, the Anarchist Cookbook, which is a book in a library that tells you how to make incendiary devices. Well, that's, something, but you have the freedom to check that out. And
That's
not arrested for.
Yeah, that's one of the books that actually brings up, like, that gets brought up in like, library graduate school and things like that, where we talk about that particular book, because there can be actionable things that happen after that. But from our perspective, it's your right as a patron to have the privacy to read this, because it's been published and you should be able to. There shouldn't be ideally any restrictions on what you read. You should have the right to educate yourself however you may want to. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So this is sort of the history of where this comes from. Generally speaking, it's the Comstock laws. I hope I'm saying that right. But if you go over to the second sentence here, I can't highlight it, but where the mouse is here, it's basically called the Parent Act. And basically it is, if you want to go over here, the act criminalize any use of the Postal Service to send any of the following items. This is actually still in place today, not for these particular things, but for like any illegal substances, things like that. This is still kind of the precedent, if you will. So any other items of obscenity, contraceptives, I can't say that, but basically things for abortions.
Yeah.
Sex toys, personal letters with any sexual contents or information regarding the above items. So this was passed in 1873. And then you'll see down here, which is kind of the following one, it's in 1909. And basically, it's, as you can see, it kind of refers to that, sorry, as a precedent for it.
And again, the US Postal Service at this time in American history, or in history at all, was so important to accessing information. Perhaps you lived in a rural area and the public library was not very easy for you to get to. There was no internet, the telephone was not also easy to use. And so the postal system was tremendously important in people's access to information. So by limiting that, imagine how limiting, period, all of that information was. And the fear itself, by people just being scared to put something in the mail, even if it didn't necessarily fit into one of these restricted categories, that is not a good feeling for people to have under a democratic regime.
Yeah, and one more note on the Postal Service. They played such a big role in terms of American literacy, especially like around this time. So much so that the paperback was actually invented so that they could fit more books in like their satchels and such, because I think this is still a time around the Pony Express, if you think about it that way.
Probably, yeah.
But so the paperback was actually a convention that was made. It was an American convention basically so that you can mail back and forth at a cheaper rate for publishers and such. But still, there was all these sort of limitations on where you could print and things like that. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is kind of the first case.
Put in your pocket.
What's that?
Paperbacks, put in your pocket. I think it
Yeah,
would fit.
totally. Yeah, you fit in the pocket and they're lighter weight. So right, the harder covers will cost more because they would weigh more. So the first case here from the Supreme Court, right? So this was like the landmark decision on this, was Roth versus the United States, and that was in 1957, where constitutes as obscene material, and basically they cited that previous law that we were talking about. And so Sam Roth was someone who ran an adult book selling business in New York City and was convicted under a federal statute criminalizing the sending of obscene, lewd, and lascivious or filthy, quote unquote, materials through the mail for advertising and selling a publication called the American Aphrodite. It's a quarterly, what's that?
Aphrodite.
Yeah, sorry, yes. And it was containing literary erotica and nude photography. So I believe he got, right, so they affirmed both convictions. So he was convicted on that. And it was, yeah, he was arrested and convicted. So what we're talking about here is an arrestable crime, first and foremost. It was a systematic one in the United States, meaning that it was basically whoever was found doing these things, sharing obscene, quote unquote, or lewd and lascivious type of stuff, and nude photography and erotica, which is why Playboy and Penthouse and these types of publications have, if you've ever seen like old TV shows or old movies, they're always spoken about in such a taboo way. Mainly because of this, because of the restriction of these cases.
And what's important to note is that the question we should also ask is who started to interpret what was filthy, what was lewd, what had no social redeemable value. Because once you say that, that's such a soft, ambiguous, subjective category. And I believe it's like 7 or 8 of the top 10 books that were banned or challenged in 2019 were done so because people felt that the issues being discussed, frequently LGBTQ plus people issues, went against society's moral beliefs. Well, that absolutely could have fallen under this law were it still in effect. So putting the book And Tango Makes Three,
Yeah.
or Heather Has Two Mommies, or Drama, which is one of the books that's commonly banned and challenged, in the mail to send to your friend, you would get arrested, literally arrested.
Or found in the possession of, which is the other, right?
Yes.
There was, I mean, depending on the book and depending on what it was, there was definitely, prosecution and yeah, I mean, prosecution in all sorts of ways. Okay, so who does the challenging? And I think we just talked about here a little bit, but parents, religious leaders, parents. So just the reason why we put parents is because as you see here, this is called the Parent Act, and a lot of the challenges and stuff like that, when we talk about public libraries, we talk about school, in terms of what we read in the curriculum and things like that. Parents have a lot of say in what their children are reading or not reading collectively. So parents, religious leaders, politicians, family groups, and community members are kind of the big stakeholders in this, I would say, and who challenges. So here's some of the justifications that I found on ALA. And this is kind of what we talked about earlier. But if you look at the second one there, I think this is what Laura was just talking about, that, the others are worried that younger or weaker people will be badly influenced by bad ideas and also will do bad things as a result.
What a superior attitude to have, that I have the right perspective, but people who disagree with me, well, they're weaker and I don't want them to harm themselves, so I will not give them information. It's such a hierarchical, superior sort of an attitude.
And also lacks all the trust, right? In the sense of, like, whoever the reader might be, or whoever is that, is accessing this information is not to be trusted with it. Essentially is what is being said. That, like, I know you can't be trusted, so therefore you should not have access to this information, even though you might not know anything about it. Yeah. And then we also have the one that starts off with, they believe that certain individuals, certain institutions, even society itself, will be endangered if particular ideas are disseminated without restriction. So that's kind of the overarching where we're at, I would say, as we're talking about in the 1950s, 1940s, something in that era. Something just that came to mind when we were talking about the McCarthy era, something that I always like to bring up because it's such a, I don't want to say fun fact, but it is a fact, that Walt Disney, famous Walt Disney, was a spy for the FBI during this time. And what that meant was that he would directly report to Eisenhower during this time of any of the Hollywood's suspicious, propaganda. Meaning, if a movie or if a director or producer had in the plans of having anything related to communism, Walt Disney would report that to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower would take action one way or the other. But it was sanctioned to that point, meaning that they were so worried about quote unquote propaganda that it was to that degree. So what we're talking about there is that sort of idea, right? That like society itself will be in danger just because they saw a movie that was either slightly favorable in terms of communism or even just delve on the, on the topic in and of itself. I think it's really
dangerous. That's the thing. That's the belief.
yes. All right. Any comments on the why or anything so far?
Yeah, we got one in the room.
Professor, they don't need to teaching.
Yes.
I feel like they themselves.
That is so, I'm sorry, yeah. That is such an accurate comment. So the gentleman in the room said that often people do not read the work in totality to completion. And so they're just reading a little piece of that. And it does absolutely happen. So they're taking that thing out of the whole story, saying, well, this is bad, this word is bad, or this action is bad, when the entire story is almost never promoting the goodness of that thing, but making a comment about it. And even if it was promoting the goodness of that thing, you still should censor it. But yes, absolutely. So they're saying, I should be the one to have this opinion, but I'm not even going to do my homework by reading the whole book. It's very frustrating. Yeah, that's a great comment.
All right. Any others before I move on to the next slide?
Oh, yeah, we got another one.
All right.
It's something is what?
Real.
Say more about that.
So, this one is happening right now is whether or not critical race theory on schools.
Yes.
Most of these people act like racism doesn't exist. And so, like, all people, like, when the civil rights movement happened, there was no infinity gauntlet that snapped away the racists. Like, they still live, they still raise their kids, they still prejudices they have, and the people are still pushing power in society.
Yes, and so the comment was that people want to ban or challenge because they will not or have a hard time admitting that something is real. Something, for example, like racism or the race structure and the caste system in America. And that is so absolutely true. It's that idea that the idea of something is so dangerous that we cannot let it be explored. We cannot let it be read and discussed about. That's great. Yes.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to hit next on here. Oh, yeah. This is an article that I pulled up mainly so y'all can see this this picture right over here. And if it might be kind of difficult just to see, but I'll just point it out that this is a 1987. So we're not talking very far here, very long ago.
I was alive. You guys were.
Right. Yeah. So 1987, and this is an anti-pornography protest in New York Times Square. And the obscenity refers to a narrow category of pornography that violates contemporary community standards and has no serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. For adults, at least most pornography receives constitutional protection. Miller versus California of 1973, that's the case, gave states greater power to shutter adult movie houses by establishing a three-part test more favorable to prosecution. The Supreme Court has resisted efforts of states to expand the rationale for obscenity laws beyond hardcore sexual material when it invalidated a California statute. So basically, I can pull up, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to, but I can drop in this here in the chat here in a bit. But this goes through the many cases in which pornography has been brought up for this, challenging those laws that we just went over, and it's based on the First Amendment. So it's the definition, as Laura was saying, is like who gets to define it, and what's the working definition of nudity or obscenity. And if I remember correctly, I don't have this right in front of me, but if I remember correctly, the case was, well, what's pornography? And I think the answer
I know
was,
it when I see it.
that's it. You know it when you see it. That's it.
You know it when you see it. Well,
That's-
oh my gosh, that is the most vague, abstract thing, but that's how they defined it.
yes.
And really quickly before we move on, I just adore this picture because this right for these protesters to peaceably assemble, which I absolutely champion their right to peaceably assemble and protest pornography if they would like to do that. This is the same right. The First Amendment is protecting this right to peaceably assemble, and it's the same right that they are protesting.
Correct.
Our right to the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech. So I don't think they see perhaps the irony in that, but I love to laugh
Absolutely.
a little.
Absolutely. That was one thing I wanted to actually bring up too. And so the other one that I don't know if people are too young, but I'm originally from Miami, and Two Live Crew is originally from there too. It's a rap crew, if you haven't heard of it, mainly from the late 80s, early 90s. They were the first ones to basically have real quote unquote obscene lyrics. And at this time,
Said the government.
what's that?
The government said that. Yeah.
Yes. So the picture that we have here is Luther Campbell, who goes by DJ Uncle Luke. Uncle Luke basically went all the way to the Supreme Court. They released the album. It was challenged the same way that any book would be. The piece of music was, and it was brought up with the First Amendment. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he won. And the reason why we have swear words or curse words or what have you in any music / media, I would say, movies and and otherwise, is because of this case. And it was a very, very big case. And I want to say, there it is, in 1989. So we're not talking very far. This was a big cultural shift in terms of, well, I would say worldwide. It was kind of loosening those really, I would say, Protestant values that were there from the very, very beginning of our country or our nation, loosening up a little bit here. So it was a 1989 case. If you enjoy hip hop as currently right now, you have a lot to thank for Luther Campbell. Yeah, this was a very big monumental case. Is there something you want to comment on that, Laura?
No, I remember it because I'm an old. So I remember this happening, and I remember them getting arrested for playing the music. They got arrested.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think it was at a listening.
I mean, it was fearful.
It was at a listening party, or like it was at some sort of it was at a gathering, and they did get arrested
like
for
a
just
club or something. Yeah.
playing the music. Like Laura said, it wasn't even distributing. I mean, afterwards, the charges were of distributing obscene, blah blah blah. Those were those were the charges. But yeah, the actual crime was playing the music. So yeah, that was Two Live Crew. Do you want to take the why, Laura?
Yes, so I wanted just to tell you guys a little bit of the why of the Harry Potter series. So we asked, I think it was Jacqueline in the chat, asked about the religious aspect of that. We talked about it. But as recently as 2019, the series, the entire books 1 to 7, were banned and forbidden from discussion. So you could not even talk about them, or you cannot even talk about them in this school where they have been banned, because they refer to magic and witchcraft. They contain actual spells. I would love to see if they work. Let's try them out. Spells, and for characters that use nefarious means to attain goals. So those nefarious means, I perhaps could speculate that they are some of the baddies, perhaps the Voldemorts of the book or the maybe the Snape of the book, or, those kinds of characters. But again, in context, the ones doing the good work are those fighting against those who are abusing children or killing people or doing negative things. And it's just the religious part piece, Roger, that you spoke of, the magic and the witchcraft too, is just strange. Now, this one is interesting. This is a Catholic school, so it's a little bit different because it's a private school. So they do have a little bit more freedom from the government and to say, okay, yeah, we're going to remove this from our shelves. And they also have to perhaps cater to the people who are paying tuition for those children to attend their schools. So they may make different choices about their library collection, but it's still quite interesting.
We've got a question from Jacqueline here in the chat, and she's writing, does anyone challenge the people who want them banned to read them? So does anyone challenge the actual people that are trying to ban the books?
The librarians do.
Yes.
They are the freedom fighters, really, honestly. They are our first line of defense. And Jacqueline, I'm going to make this so about you, you challenge them. And so to all of you in the room, if somebody were to ever say, well, no, nobody should read that book, challenge them. Yes. And I say, maybe throw a fist, maybe not, maybe like a metaphorical fist. Throw a pencil. Yeah, that's such a good question. Oh, we've got one in the room too.
What I thought, about the Catholic Church trying to censor Harry Potter, around the actual witchcraft, is that the so-called spells are literally just speaking Latin. Like Levi corpses is raised body, or like Expelliarmus is remove arm, as in like church is taught in Latin, it's literally spelled, things are flying around the room.
Of course.
But okay.
Irony, I know, lack of self-awareness, perhaps.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to hit the next slide here. Right. Okay, so we're not going to have time to watch this whole entire thing, but in relation to basically around the same time as that Luther Campbell, case, there was the case, and the PMRC stands for Parents. I can't remember the red, but it's a parent organization. And this was the Senate hearing. So this is John Denver. If you're not familiar with Twisted Sister, Twisted Sister's lead singer, Dee Snider, who has a really crazy long hair, kind of like Slash, if you're familiar with Guns N' Roses. He's got
blonde and beautiful.
Yeah. So the reason why, and this is kind of funny, the reason why I have John Denver's up here, and I encourage you to go look it up, whenever you get a chance when you get home, pull it up on your phone. So Dee Snider went first in this testimony, and Dee Snider, or what everyone thought was, which was true, he was pro non-censorship. He was all about don't censor anything, let it be. And so this group brought in John Denver thinking that that would be the counter to Dee Snider's claim. And if you watch the video, John Denver goes on a 7-minute rant about how there should not be any censorship at all, even though he doesn't agree with, certain things that might be, out there. He is up against it. And that sort of it sort of went against what they had originally thought. And it's such a win for the people that are against censorship. Yeah.
It is. And it's again, another point of the people not doing their homework.
Yeah.
John Denver looks like this, all-American, just lovely and perhaps conservative, if you think of him that way. He sang with Kermit the Frog on the Muppet Show. He's such like a kind and loving sort of father figure. And so people perhaps assumed that he was going to be okay with censorship, but they didn't do their homework. And he gets up there and he's like, well, actually.
Right. Well, actually, no.
It's just wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to start playing. Here, let me see if I can go to the next one. Okay. So we got a few more slides here, and this is the effects and what we can do about it. So I was doing some research here, and basically libricide is this term that is used basically when it's the destruction of any cultural property. So meaning libraries, museums is also something that we haven't spoken about, but it is something that gets they're kind of the first to go, honestly. Like it's museums and libraries whenever there's a political, coup or turnover or turmoil. And as we see here, right, it's the purpose of cultural property destruction in common throughout history to erase ethnic or religious or cultural memories, and therefore to undermine or eliminate groups' identity and existence. So there's lots of examples here that we can rattle off, but I think I've got one. Here, let me just go really quick to Iraq, and I'll move back to the slide here. But this is a fairly recent one. The Iraq National Library and Archives in Baghdad, not surprisingly, after the U.S. troops entered Baghdad in 2004, the looting of burning of museums and libraries contained centuries worth of cultural heritage spread very quickly throughout Iraq. The National Library and National Archives housed in the same building were burned by two fires caused by incendiary materials between 10 and the 14th of April of 2004. This happens all the time. It's not unique either to the United States or this particular time in Iraq. When the Taliban took over Afghanistan, they destroyed probably one of the oldest Buddhist statues that were still kind of around. I think there was about 5 or 6 of them that they just completely destroyed. Just in general, right, when China invaded Tibet in 55, I think it was 57, somewhere in there, they did the same things. We lost so much history in that in general. So this is something fairly common, especially when there is a turnover in power, and especially if there's a turnover of power from a different altogether group. So if there's a group that is either overcame or took over or invaded another set of group of people, more than likely this to some degree will happen. And it's the rewriting of history. It's kind of, unfortunately, a very human thing to do. It's a pattern of history, of human history, I should say. So that was an example. Let me go back to what we can do, and something that we've done in the past. So after World War II, particularly after the Nazis went and it basically like museums, histories, and everything else, they were in the habit of taking everything and burning everything that was left, especially as they sort of moved through Europe in their invasion. So here we have a picture of some soldiers with some presumably fine art. And so the 1954 Hague, I think it's a Dutch word.
Yeah, you got it.
Convention and Preserving of Cultural Heritage was something that UNESCO put together. And it was the first ever international treaty dedicated exclusively to the protection of cultural heritage during armed conflict. So during the time that there was any sort of government change, political change, systematic change, I would say, there is a policy that should be upheld by this treaty. As we can see, this was 1954, and I just showed you the 2004 case. So it's kind of base by base, and it should be. Those are. It was signed for. It was an international treaty, so it should be upheld. But as we just talked about, most times it's not. All right, so let's see if there's any other. Let's see, what's the next one here? That was the Iraq case that we were talking about.
While you're looking, Roger, I'm gonna totally put one of the people in this room on the spot because I know for a fact that yesterday she was involved in a little class activity about how we as people can fight censorship or what we can do to combat this idea of censorship. So maybe Lally would like to tell us what she talked about. What did your group say was something that we could do to fight censorship? Excellent. Inform yourself. Good. Question it. That is something that is so important because that's an active thing to question something. Good. Okay. Good. Take action and then inform others. How can you take action? And that's a bigger question too for everybody, not just for Zulali, that I just put you on the spot. Yes. 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 Perfect. Yeah. So go to your library, ask questions, find some things out. Also, you could read a book. Absolutely. You can take a look at one of the 1,200 titles or more and just read one. And some of them are very, very short. So it will not even take you that much time. Look how skinny this one is. It's like the skinniest little book. Some of them are children's books, literally. All right.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for everyone who Jacqueline is writing in the chat here, says take action by doing research, spreading what we learn, and being welcoming and patient to other people's views.
Very good. Yeah.
And one thing I just like to add to that is kind of just generally speaking, right? It's just employing critical thinking skills. It's how you fight it is by employing those critical thinking skills and be like, well, we probably shouldn't be censoring these. Probably have an open conversation and see where that, right? It's through education is kind of the way through, I would say. All right, I'm going to go through the next slide here. So we have the effects of censorship. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is there is, as we talk about obscenity and nudity and things like this, Facebook and Instagram just released, I think it was the last couple of months, I want to say, they released a new guideline, for community guidelines. I'm sure if you've used this throughout the last year, you've probably come across this at some point, whether in either your stories or your posts or what have you. I know that I've been, when I've been on Instagram or I've been on like social media, I've definitely seen that, right? As you get that little warning now, it's like you can see photo or, what have you. And it's just kind of interesting because Facebook/Instagram/ Mark, Zuckerberg is the one that is setting these rules forward, right? So the community guidelines, I'm not sure who the community is, and I'm not sure who's the one setting those guidelines for that. But they're not the only one. I mean, if you remember, like, Tumblr kind of died once they removed their sort of nudity, or once they sort of imposed that. There was not too long ago as well, I don't know if it went through or not, but it was in the news that like OnlyFans was also removing nudity and things like that from that platform. So those are ways in which censorship at maybe a more indirect level is still happening in social media platforms and things like that. Any comments on that or anything that anyone wants to add?
Ooh, yeah, Brennan.
So that Tumblr had a corporate buyout for over $1 billion, and that was all for adult content. Other companies worth less than 1%.
Yeah, right. I mean, hate to say it, except yeah. Tumblr now is on the verge of not like viable business model anymore. Yeah, because that eliminated a huge number of their fans, the people that are users, rather. Yeah, Zulali. Oh, TikTok, yeah. Yes. Yes.
There was a lot of censorship with that. Protests that were happening. Yes. Also on Twitter.
Yes, and so the comment in the room was that this idea of shadow banning on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and I know that I've seen that in my feed where people that I follow have said, okay, I just got shadow banned because somebody thinks that my post about transgender issues is inappropriate. And so now nobody can see it. So please like my account so that we can kind of start getting this back up. And that is also a very subversive way of restricting content and censoring accounts.
Yeah, and to add to that, Jacqueline here in the chat is saying it's a thin line between censorship and being a nation of free people in general. As you see throughout this presentation, the banning of one type of media has trickled down through our entire lives. Absolutely. Let's see, I'm going to click on over to the next slide. And so thinking about it differently, right? So when we talk about when it's not an external agency, when it's the users or the readers or what have you, and kind of in a self-imposed censorship, and what we have here is kind of, cancel culture or social attitudes and self-imposed change. So how public rhetoric seems to change with, with cancel culture or maybe influenced by, and so the ownership is on the audience, right? On the reader, whoever's on the receiving end of that, rather than imposed by sort of, as we were talking about previously during the MacArthur era, things like that, where it's kind of a systematic one. This one's a little bit different in the sense that like it's censorship from peer to peer, if you will, not from individual in terms of larger umbrella. So this one seems to be interesting, and it seems to be an ongoing one. It's changing here and there, and depending on the community in which that is participating in this, it can take a different kind of flavor. But mainly what we're trying to convey here is that this is one that seems to be from peer to peer or individual to to individual sort of, and then taken to a larger community level, as opposed to kind of being imposed onto the individual. Any thoughts on that or any comments? I think this might be the last. Yeah, this might be the last. This is the last slide. So any last comments or anything else that any burning thoughts or anything you want to share with the group?
I got one in the room.
Because everyone has laughed at something the idea that someone maybe tweeted 10 years ago about where they're at today, if they have stopped on the phone, they corrected their behavior, why do we need 7?
Yeah, cancel culture, the comment in the room was on the odd nature, bizarre nature of cancel culture in general. And yeah, it becomes, is it that slippery slope? What happens when everything is canceled? Yeah, it's tricky. It's really tricky. Oh yeah, we got one in the room. Yeah. Yes. It is, absolutely. And the comment is about that people are still human, and we have to understand that. And it's also so tricky to imagine that just really 10 years ago, this wasn't a thing on the scale that it is now, because we were not documenting our actions at the level that we are currently documenting them. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I love documenting the things that I document, the cookies that I eat, which I eat a lot of cookies, but that is really, it's hard. Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
See, I don't think we have any in the chat.
Wait, we have one more in the room. Sorry.
Good.
With censorship, I feel that I might not agree with your point of view, but I will fight for your right to say it. Like, I feel like we can have that. I might not necessarily agree with it, but I will fight for your right to say it.
Absolutely. And the comment in the room is, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will fight for your right to say it. And I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely. Oh, so I think we maybe have the smartest workshop participants of all workshops. Maybe I'll just say that. I don't know if it's an exaggeration, but
I'm going to put our information back here. If anyone wants to continue, here is our information. And again, just one last time, if anyone wants to go to the book club, let me know. It'll be on October 5th at 2:30. And thank you for the people that are there, and thank you for the Zoomers that joined. Thank you for having us, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Roger. Oh, thank you, Laura. Thank you both. amazing job with this whole presentation. I just wanted to let you all know, Melissa in the back here, went out of her way and did the raffle for, the students. So we got Matthew. Is Matthew here in person? Okay. So, if you don't mind going to the back and grabbing your freebie. And then, thank you everyone for coming in. We appreciate it. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Laura.
My pleasure. Bye, guys.